Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 142.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Again, this is Keith Parsons with Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, and today I have Scott McDermott with me. Scott, how are you today?
I am doing pretty good.
And how are those alpacas doing?
My alpacas are also doing good. I actually, 2 weeks ago, I added 3 more to my herd. So.
Oh, you did? So other than very nice, big, soft, furry pets, I don't know what you do with alpacas. Do you ride them? Do you eat them? Do you just get their fur or something?
Some people do eat them. That's less of a thing in the U.S. It seems to be bigger outside, but it definitely, there's about 50 miles south of where I am near Seattle, there's a huge alpaca farm that has like 1,400 alpacas, and most of their alpacas end up becoming meat. So Some people eat them, but most people just use them for their fur, for their fleece, and turn it into high quality garments.
Oh, so how often can you, is it like sheep, you just shear them once a year?
Yeah, you shear them once a year.
Then they look all naked afterward.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because it's like all of a sudden they're like a half to a third the size they were before. And it's like, you're a lot smaller than I remember.
Well, we're here, nice to talk about alpacas, but we're here talking about WLPC is coming up actually just next week, but by the time this gets published, it'll probably be over. But we wanted to talk about the deep dive that you and Jerry are working on doing mobile testing. So you got a couple of minutes to talk about that?
Well, Jerry has been working on single board computer devices that give us a base platform to do some wireless analysis, do some performance testing, and maybe some remote monitoring, and some interesting stuff going on with that. And people who have been to WLPC before or have followed this before may have seen the Odroid units that have been used. And he's found a really nifty little box that's nice and made of metal, so it's sturdy and it won't get damaged in your bag. And it's actually got really good performance. That's sort of the primary platform. And then we're going to be using some Android tablets, and we're going to do some basic wireless analysis stuff, do some performance testing, looking a little bit at RF, what we can, and then using some of the tools that are built into this build that Jerry has for these little NanoPi boxes. And it should be a lot of fun. It's going to be all hands on and just playing with Wi-Fi, which is,
Playing with Wi-Fi is a great way to spend an afternoon or two, and we'll be spending 2 90-minute sessions on there. So can you give us a couple of examples of some of the tests we'll be running?
Well, probably the bulk of the tests are going to be, testing Wi-Fi performance, mostly like throughput type tests. So we've got several different protocols that we're going to be able to use, so you can do some slightly different kinds of tests. And this will give us a really good ability to validate a minimum level of performance on the Wi-Fi, because the NanoPi is going to be connected to a wired network, and then you're going to use the Android, and it'll be connected to a wireless network. And then we'll be able to push data back and forth, and you'll be able to see your upstream and downstream throughput. And then I think the other thing that's going to be a lot of fun is we're going to have Kismet running on the NanoPi, so we'll be able to connect to it and use it almost like a remote sensor and see what it sees is going on in the local area. So they could be interesting. You could get fun things that you could start to do with these is they're very inexpensive. So you could start, deploying them to locations, and it's like somebody calls with a trouble report, and you just connect your remote NanoPi, and you can actually get some view of what's going on the network. It's not quite the level of, some super high-end stuff, but this is, it's not like a 7-signal type thing or anything like that. But for the price, you can do a lot of great troubleshooting without having to be on site.
And the other tool you're using is an Android, fairly inexpensive option for a toolkit there as well. What kind of applications are you planning on covering with the Android?
We're going to be using SpeedFlex, the Ruckus Zap thing to do some performance testing. We're also going to be playing with iPerf2 and iPerf3. We're going to use one of the many Wi-Fi analyzer apps that are available out there, so you can get kind of an idea of where the APs are and kind of the channel plan. And then time permitting, we're going to go into doing some Kismet labs because the Kismet is web-based, so you can just actually access it directly from the Android tablet, so you don't have to actually pull out your laptop. So it makes just kind of a nice portable setup. And then we might do some stuff with command line, maybe on your laptop, maybe on your tablet. We might make that sort of an option. You can choose whatever. It'd be nice to do it through the Android, but that's not everybody's fingers are great at typing command line stuff through that. So that you can kind of go either way for that one. But certainly we'll have the tools available and show you how to get the stuff set up so that if you want to travel with a super lightweight portable setup that you can more or less carry all the time without having to have a laptop with you, you at least have some level of tools available for you.
And what was your reasoning on the choice of a tablet rather than an Android phone?
Well, there's two purposes. One, tablet this is sort of a mid-sized tablet. It's an 8-inch tablet, so it's not a big 10-inch tablet, because 10-inch tablet, while it gives you more power, is not quite as portable. The biggest downside to going to the phones is it's a small screen. You probably already have a phone anyway, although it might not be an Android. So a lot of these tools we can't use on iOS because of the limitations that iOS has on how much you can look at the wireless network, at least with an application that's published in the App Store. So one of the reasons to use the Android operating system is because it does give the developer an opportunity to look a little lower level. So then that enables some of these tools, which we couldn't do on the Apple platform. The phones also can get really expensive. So it's just I kind of would have liked to have done a phone, but it's price prohibitive because they just have so much more in them, and then the smaller size, it just really makes them shockingly more expensive than a tablet. And so, if you've got a tablet that you can it's an inexpensive tablet, so it's something that you can dedicate to the task. And then if something happens to it, you don't have to be so worried about it. Whereas if you had a phone, it's just naturally you'd be like, my phone.
So thanks for your time, Scott. Look forward to enjoying this session at WLPC with you, and having a good time when we get all together.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. It's always a great conference.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Back to basics.
So today's podcast is on learning wireless LAN technologies. And I want you to know that I've done it. So I've been there before, and I spend the majority of my time during my waking hours helping other people to learn these technologies too. So this episode is on how we can take what I've learned, and I want to share with you so and help you learn as well. Well, the first is something called learning styles. And in learning styles, this is some, academic type folks have went along and said, well, some people learn by doing, some people learn by listening, some people learn by visual, some learn by doing. There's a bunch of different styles. And in the show notes, I left a link there where you can go take an inventory and find out what kind of a learner are you. Usually it's pretty easy, and you could just listen to your own vocabulary. And when you talk to others, is it more based on what you want them to show you something, or do you want to hear it or see it? Or let me see it or let me hear it. And you can even hear that yourselves. I know with my wife, when she is, giving me this big list of things that she wants me to do, I go, just write it down. If I can see it, I can do it. If you say it and it goes in my ear, it just disappears. I have to, for me personally, stuff has to come in my eyes in order for it to stick. So I'm obviously a very visual learner, and that's how I do stuff. So one method of learning has to do with that style, and you need to find your style. And then a lot of the learning technologies and techniques are focused on a certain learning style. And if that style isn't matching yours, then find another option. We have lots of options in the training world, so make sure you find one that matches you. Years ago, I was involved in the writing of certification exams. A whole series of exams I've developed 7 different certification programs for a variety of vendors, IBM, VeriSign, Novell, Microsoft, etc. And in that process, we came across this thing called Bloom's taxonomy. Big fancy name. I'm sure you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy, where, basic needs are at the bottom, at the top is self-actualization. Well, in Bloom's taxonomy, he talks about the different types of things we might want to learn. Some things we need to learn are just straight rote memorization, and that's the very bottom of his pyramid. And in the show notes, there's a link to a picture. You can blow it up and kind of follow along and look in the Bloom's taxonomy pyramid or hierarchy. As you're looking at different goals, there's different ways to learn to reach those goals. Now, for a certification exam, we had to go and interview people who did the job, who were out every day working in that field doing that job, and find out what types of work were you doing in order to accomplish the task. And then for those tasks, what did you need to know? And then we took what they talked about, what they needed to know, and backed into Bloom's taxonomy to find out how difficult those things were, and did it need more than rote knowledge? Did it need actual synthesis, knowledge from 3 or 4 different places, and to synthesize those together? And then that would tell us how to write the course and the test questions that could test that. Well, you need to know as you start studying, is the topic you're studying at the top of Bloom's taxonomy? Is it something where you need to do full evaluation or just synthesis? Or is it straight up, I just need to know the command to, open up a print queue? Well, that's something you can memorize. So you need to think yourself as you go about looking into these, which one and where does your learning need to be? So first, find out what's your learning style. Do you learn visually or via auditory or physical? I had a guy who worked with me for a while. His daughter learned math by doing. She had to stand and walk around the classroom and touch 3 or 7 or move physical things, and then she could remember. Others need to hear, and you need someone to talk to you about it or listen over and over, and so audio tapes might be good for other people. Another thing to think about during your learning style is, when is your best time to study? Not just when, but where is your best time to study? Do you have a study area where you can go and sit and be quiet? Do you need to have music playing in the background? What kind of music? Does it need to be like Mozart, that is found to be very helpful for learning math? Or are you a rocker and want to listen to rock to distract you, that part of your brain, so you could focus on another part of your brain? And you need to get permission to learn. Not just permission from your spouse to take the time off and convince her why, or him, depending on who you are, your spouse, why you need to have the time alone to study and how it's going to help your career, etc. But you need to get permission from your boss for the time off, and specifically permission from yourself, that you're giving yourself permission to focus. And learning is all about focus. What am I going to do for the next period of time? How am I going to learn? And do I have permission myself to ignore other things that might need to get done, because learning's become a priority? So setting a priority is very helpful. I had a partner once, a great guy, loved him. He's now moved on to other things, and we're still good friends. But he, at the time, we were doing a bunch of training. In fact, at the time, we were training people who were, because of NAFTA came and was approved, a very large steel mill was closed down, and so we were retraining steel mill workers to get their A+, the Network Plus, their Server Plus, CNE from Novell, and a MCSE from Microsoft, and a CCA from Cisco, all in this big, long, 4-month chunk of time. They would receive 7 different certifications. It was a pretty cool thing. We were working. And then on one of the occasions, I was working with this partner, and I asked him to go study something so we could go and, teach that next level course. And he said, well, I can't do it. I haven't done it yet. And then, we got in a little tiff a bit about, why don't you just go read it? Go, read up so you know it. And he said, I only learn by things I've done. And then I made up this real pithy statement. At the time, it sounded kind of silly. But over the years, it's actually become kind of part of how I teach and teach other people. And the pithy statement was, if you only learn by doing, then you'll only ever know what you've done. Well, of course, that's obvious. But then when you think about it, those people who learn by doing only are limited to just the things that they've done. If they've never done it, they don't know how to do it at all. Well, there's a lot of learning that takes place on things you don't actually have to do, but you can still learn them. Now, as we go down in some of our learning options in the next following section, we're going to talk about some of the options, and, you know, self-study and hands-on are some of the options. But there are other things you also have to learn and do, and some things that are conceptual, like the OSI model. It's kind of hard to do the OSI model, and yet it's critical in our networking world that you not only understand that, but you can use it a different way. So if you wanted to go and look at the graphic that's on the show notes for Bloom's taxonomy, at the very bottom level is knowledge, just straight rote memorization. Well, the first time I went about learning the OSI model, it was definitely at the knowledge level, the very base level, memorized. All people seem to need data processing, or please do not throw sausage pizza away. And I could regurgitate each of the names of the layers, but I really didn't understand what they did. Well, to understand is the next level up, called comprehension. And not only do you have rote memorization, but you understand what each of those do. And I slowly learned that. And later, probably a year or two after I first learned about the OSI model, I moved up Bloom's taxonomy to something called application, where I could apply that knowledge. Oh, I need to put a bridge in here because a bridge is going to break up a collision domain, because at the physical layer, these things are happening, and the bridge is going to use MAC layer definitions to make the changes. Oh, okay, so I'm now applying it. Then if you climbed even higher, then you can use the knowledge about just the OSI model, not knowledge, not comprehension and application, but now we're going to do some analysis, thinking about how things work because of there. And a lot of the OSI model's effectiveness happens when you get into troubleshooting. That's analysis of the data. Again, climbing up Bloom's taxonomy. And eventually you want to get to something where there's synthesis. And in the wireless LAN technologies, you need to know the OSI model at the synthesis level, not just at the knowledge or comprehension or even application, but we're synthesizing and merging two separate groups from the wireless side, 802.11, and we're translating that into the Ethernet side, 802.3. And we need to be able to synthesize the information from one side and apply it to the other. So Bloom's taxonomy, look back at what you're doing. From the simplest little OSI model, you can also use it to climb from knowledge all the way up to synthesis to evaluation. Let's move on now to some learning options. And the first learning option I'm going to go with is instructor-led training. I like instructor-led training. I like attending instructor-led training. I like giving instructor-led training. I think it's the most effective, efficient use of everyone's time if the goal is to take someone and to give them knowledge and have them able to use that knowledge in the future. Now, the reason I like it, one, it's my career, so I'm, a little coin operated there, and obviously I get paid for doing that, so I kind of like doing it. But as a student, and I try to spend at least 2 and usually 3 weeks a year in my own training for myself, and I attend other people's classes, and I would much rather attend an instructor-led class because when I sit in the class, I'm focused. I got on a plane, I flew, I'm in a hotel room, I wake up in the morning, and today's job is learning. That's all I have to do today. I'm not answering phones, I'm not answering emails, I am learning today. And as an instructor, I would really appreciate it if when students come to class, they come with that attitude. You are here to learn today. Now, I have, and I admit I'm one of those. Sometimes I'll sit in class with my computer open and on the internet, and as the instructor mentions something, there is a fantastic capability that as an instructor says something that triggers something in your mind, and to be able to link some knowledge you already have to the knowledge that you just learned is a good way to learn and remember things. That linkage is good. One of the effects that you can have in class with a laptop open is as the instructor says something that triggers something in your head or another question, you can go directly to Google and ask and learn more. And all of a sudden there's a whole wealth of information out there available in Google. The problem is, as you're Googling, the instructor is continuing on down his path, teaching the next concept, and you are missing that concept. Something I found that helps a lot in this process, well, one of two things. Either the use of Evernote. Evernote's a piece of software. It runs on Windows, Mac, probably runs on DOS even, but anything you're probably using. And it's a little plug-in for Firefox or Internet Explorer or Chrome, where you go to that web page, you Googled it, you saw, this is really good information. It links back into what we just covered in class, and you click Evernote and say save it. And it will save that file over into your notebook. And then you can return your attention back to what the instructor is and stay together. But now you have not just a mere bookmark, but it copied all of the files for you into a searchable notebook for you called Evernote. The other one I use a lot is called Instapaper. I have an iPhone and an iPad, and if I hit a web page that I want to remember and I don't have time right then to go out and jump to it, click on a read later button that's on my browser, and there I go. It's all saved into Instapaper. Later, when I sync up my iPad, all of those things that I could have learned live at the moment but were distracting are sitting back in my Instapaper, and later that night I can go back through them and learn. So having an ability to do those extra little searches during the middle of a discussion is a fantastic opportunity. What's not so fantastic is one click away, you have Facebook and Twitter and just a regular web page and CNN, and it's the middle of the season that we're recording this right now. We're in the middle of the World Cup, and someone just posted a new World Cup score, and you got to go look at it. And all of those things take time and focus away from what you're learning in class. So I like instructor-led classes. I love instructor-led classes. I like attending them. I like teaching them. But focus on what you're doing. Focus is really important. Instructor-led classes cost more money. They cost more money for the reason that they're better. They're better at delivering knowledge and getting it in your head and making it stick because of the focus. It's not just because you have an instructor sitting in front of the room. Now, I like having an instructor there that's teaching and is more knowledgeable on the subject than I am, but I also like the fact that I have nothing else to do that day. My job that day is to learn. In fact, that night, I don't have to go home and worry about mowing the lawn or playing with the children or giving the kids a bath. My job at night is to continue to learn. One of my frustrating parts is about on the day after I've taught a nice session. The next morning I come in and some of the students ask questions about what they studied at night that they were trying to reinforce what they learned the day before, and they have brilliant questions that I could tell that they needed to synthesize the data way up the Bloom's taxonomy. Others come back and talk about the baseball game they went to because it's on a lark. My company paid me to come here, and we went to dinner, we went out to a show, we went drinking. Wait, your job is to study. And for those of you who like to think that your job is over at 5 o'clock, when you're doing instructor-led training, it's not. You're there to study into the night until you can not study anymore and then fall asleep and do it again the next day. So for certification training, I think instructor-led is the only way to go. It allows you to focus. You go to a boot camp, and at the end, you can go and take and pass the test. Just a hint on the side, if you're taking a boot camp, please take the test the day after the class or the afternoon of the last day if you can. The knowledge in your head will never be better than right then. You've just spent 40 to 60 hours that week focusing on a subject. You're going to go home and say, I'll study one more week. I'm just not ready yet. Well, if you're not ready yet, take the test anyway. One, you've got as much knowledge in your head as you're going to get. You've had 40 to 60 hours of focused effort on that one topic. Take the test. If you fail, you now have learned more. You learned what you didn't know. A lot of students, though, go, I don't want to waste the voucher and I don't want to pay for the test again. So they go home and they have home responsibilities and the wife and the children and the work hits back in, and they slowly, over weeks or even months, or had some people over a year, it takes to pass the exam because they have to go back and they lost all the focus. So if you really want to pass the cert, dedicate, put the focus in. It's no distractions that really helps. So does instructor-led work for you? If so, why? And think through it. In the classes you've taken so far, where did you have the best knowledge? And by the way, if you're thinking back to your college days, for a while I've been an adjunct professor at a couple universities teaching some of their courses. And from an instructor standpoint,
teaching at a university is a breeze. You only have to teach an hour and a half a day, 2 days, maybe 3 days a week. That's nothing. And if you think about it, and I have, we actually showed this, taking 1 week's course, say a CCNA course, is equal to 1 semester's class. So when you just dedicate 1 week of your life, you get as much learning as you would have got over an entire semester of any one individual course. So, instructor-led training, good stuff. Next one on is self-study. Again, I've done lots and lots of self-study. I was just looking up on the bookshelf on my wall here, and there's probably 4 shelves of nothing but wireless books. That's a lot of learning. I mean, they're about 3 feet. Say there's 10, maybe 12 linear feet of books of wireless LAN information. That plus the networking, all the other books that are in the room as well. There is a lot to do in self-study. There's books, CBTs, white papers, audio tracks. I really like books. I'm addicted to books. I buy them all the time. If there's just one chapter in a book that I'll learn something I didn't know before, it's worth picking up the book. Lately, however, I've been trying to get away from paper books. One, they're really heavy. They're hard to carry back to and from areas. I started out with the Kindle, and I went to Kindle DX, trying to find a really good ebook/PDF reader. I've now settled on an iPad, and I really like using a software called Good Reader on an iPad. For the one reason, I have hundreds of tech pubs available to me that are searchable, easy to read, and I can even zoom in on the graphics and work on them. I couldn't do that with the Kindle quite well. The iPad works fantastic for that. I tried to buy my books in EPUB format, like a Kindle format, or actually the format called EPUB that is Apple uses. If I can't get that, I'll go to a PDF. PDFs aren't always as searchable as the EPUB format, but I'll take a PDF and I can zoom in. And the last resort would be to buy a paper copy. I really like having hundreds of books and technology knowledge sitting right there in my hand. So can't talk about that enough. Remember, to be a good student, even in self-study, you got to ask a lot of questions. Now, there's no instructor in the room to answer it, but there's always Twitter. You can go and drop out a question on Twitter, and you'll probably get an answer within minutes. There's, especially for wireless networking, you can go to the CWNP site, and the CWNP forums are available. You can pop questions up there. Cisco has forums for those of you who are working in Cisco world. So ask questions. And sometimes you have a question you just want to answer. Google the question itself, and you'll find amazing answers. Not that Wikipedia is always perfect, but there's a lot. You can learn a lot from the Wikipedia articles that are out there. So self-study, nothing wrong with it. It's a lot cheaper. But again, you still have to focus. And I have, in the past, rented a hotel room, taken my books and my hands-on equipment that I'm going to study on, and pretended that I was in a instructor-led class with no instructor in the room. But you need that focus where there's no other distractions coming along. The next one I'm going to talk about shortly, and it's not very long for me because I'm kind of not into it, is group study. Now, some people are social learners. They need to have other people around them to bounce ideas off of, to have a little interaction. And this kind of person, if this is you, nothing wrong with it. It's just not me. But they like to process the information before they assimilate the information. In my MBA classes, we were assigned into study groups because, some of the organizational behavior folks in our MBA program thought groups are better. I'm not one of those. I think they're kind of a waste of time. It's like trying to manage through a committee. Everyone is weaker than any individual themselves. That little example where you take, one pencil, anybody can break it, but you put 20 pencils together, you can't break them as a group. Yeah, it's not a log. It's 20 individual pencils. And as long as they do their own job, wonderful. If, however, I don't mean to mean this, sorry. If you are one of those learners who learn socially, then make sure you get in social environments for learning. Set up study groups for CCNA or CCNP, CWNA, CWSP, whatever study group you like. They can be online. They can be live. They can have weekly calls. If you need that assimilation, the interaction to be able to get that information in your head and stick, then form those little communities around making that happen. You can go again onto the CWNP forums or Cisco's forums and have that interaction there, or just call around and get other people. I'd recommend, if you have that kind of need, get on Twitter, or you can go to the Wireless LAN Professionals website, the website where you're listening to this podcast. On the resource tab, there's a list of all the Twitter people I like to follow in the wireless industry, and there's a group there you can work with. So get together. If you do need that as well, and I've had this a lot of times in my classes, there might be 15, 20 people in the class, and 4 or 5 of them get together after class at night and form a little study group to focus on what we covered during the day. It's been very effective for them. So if you like to study that way, group study is a good way to go. Next one is hands-on. And this is kind of a subset of all the others. You can do hands-on group study, I guess. Never tried it. But definitely for self-study hands-on instructor-led, great stuff. A lot of IT folks, myself included, learn best through working through an interface. We kind of learn by trying and failing and trying and failing. Someone once said to me that as adults, we learn through failure, which is kind of why I'm glad that we learned to drive before we got to be adults. But we do have this failure thing where we try it, and if it fails, we move on. We learn from our failures. In the interface world of IT, you jump into a screen, you click, you go, oh, it's not there. Well, you probably didn't think of that as a failure, but it was. You didn't succeed in the little thing you attempted, so you try something else to get there. I think it's a way we learn. Accept that and try stuff without any fear. One of the problems we run across with some students who come into class is they're afraid of hurting the equipment or making a problem. And so a lot of the techniques are you just have them do it and then reset and do it again and reset and do it again and realize whatever they do, worst case scenario, you just reset it and set it back. Very few things in IT can be broken permanently. Now, yeah, I know there are some, but for the most part, we can go away with this. So, hands-on, you've got to do stuff with hands-on. But one caveat on the whole hands-on thing. Many times when I teach or consult, I have people who have learned, Cisco or WLCs or even the Aruba controller through that failure issue. They get into the screen, they try, they do good, and they try, and they've come across and they've got into wireless because they learned hands-on only. They didn't understand the base understanding of how 802.11 works. And thus, when they go back to troubleshoot, many of their problems they're trying to fix, the problems are there because they didn't understand the base technology that's sitting underneath 802.11. 802.11 is not Ethernet. It's like Ethernet, but there's a lot of things that are totally different. Many of the things are counterintuitive. I recommend understanding and having a base knowledge of the technology before you implement. Interfaces are really easy to work on. One of my biggest pet peeves in the classroom is when people have to get to the interface and they have questions about how to do things in specific pieces of software, but they refuse to learn why you should be in the interface at all. Learn the concepts first, and the interface will be so much easier to understand. Well, that was my little rant, but it's true. Don't worry about where you are in the screen or how you got to this one page or any of that. What you want to do is know why you're on that screen. What is it saying on the screen, not how the little clicky parts go. Anyone can learn the interface. That's what user guides are for. And by the way, you kind of ought to read the user guides. Hands-on's great, but understand the technology underneath. And the last one we're going to talk about training options is online training. And online training, first, learn how to be a good online training student. Prepare your online interface before class. Test it, retest it, make sure your connections are up, your headset's working, all the parts are in place, so that 9 a.m. on the morning of class, you're not the one calling in and going, I can't see your screen. You're not moving to the left. And you're like, well, did you run through the interface yet? Well, it's still downloading. Get it done and out of the way first. You don't want to be that guy. Use a headphone and a good mic. Personally, I like using either Bose noise canceling headphones, or I use Dr. Dre Beats headphones, something that can go over the ear and basically drown everything out so I can focus. Again, you see a consistent theme here? Focus. Learning is a matter of focus. And for online training, ask lots of questions. More questions than you probably would ask in a live class. Open your mouth, open the keyboard, raise your hand in the online system, and ask a lot of questions. One of the issues with online training, and why personally I don't have that much experience in it because it doesn't work for me, is that you are one click away from doing something you'd like to do. Facebook, Twitter, email, answering something, just surfing the net, finding the news scores. They're one click away. And you're in the middle of an online class, and that temptation is huge to go do anything else. Some online classes are long, 4, 6, 8 hours in a day. And so people put a speakerphone on, then they kind of wander around the room and they end up working or reading. That's not focus. It is hard to learn. It is even harder to learn it online because you have to focus on what you're doing. Try to be nice to your neighbors. They're also trying to learn. Know how to mute your phone so that your little background noise doesn't happen. Don't put music in the background. It's harder as an instructor to teach online training than face-to-face instructor-led. By far. Way, way harder. There's a lack of feedback. It's tough to maintain student attention. You feel like you're, trying to keep everyone from that one click away, and you stay fast, and you don't have the time to allow it to sink in. And a lot of times you just need some time to assimilate the information and then hear it a different way. So when you're doing online training, try to study anywhere but your office desk. At your office desk, you have distractions. When you're in class, even online class, you are not working. This is learning time. Learning time means you're focused on that one task at hand, and you're not answering calls, you're not answering emails, you're not doing any of those other things. Priorities, folks. Get your priorities straight. If you don't want the online class, don't sign up for it. Don't attend. But if you do want it, then you've made a decision, and someone's made the decision at least, and they're paying money for your time and the cost of the class. Focus, focus, focus. Okay, that's enough on all the online training and the self-study training and hands-on training and all those pieces. I just give you some options there, something to think about in your own world.
10 Talks.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Zaib Kaleem. I'm with Access Agility. We're a systems engineering company out of Virginia, near the Washington, D.C. area. What we mainly do is wireless design, implementation work for the U.S. federal government customers, but we also dabble in wireless tools. We have sort of a side business where we make wireless tools for everyone. The hashtag for this talk is WLPC, plus please add on iPerf3. That way people that are not looking for WLPC but have interest in iPerf3, they'll be able to find this also. iPerf is something that I've used for a long time, and it's been around for 10 plus years. And over the last 5 or 6 years, the newest version of iPerf3 has actually been more actively developed than the older versions. And that's the one that this talk is mainly focused on, which is iPerf3. iPerf3 and iPerf2 and 1 work pretty much the same way. The concept is a sender, or something that sends traffic, and then a receiver that receives traffic. And you use a command line to set up the sender and receiver, and they send data back and forth between the two different host machines. The good part is that iPerf3 is actively developed, but the bad part is that when they re-engineered or redeveloped iPerf3, they started from scratch, and it's not compatible with iPerf2 or iPerf1. So if you have iPerf2 or iPerf1, you won't be able to use iPerf3. You have to install iPerf3 from the source or compile it. iPerf3 works the same way as iPerf1 and 2. The most common way to run it is to do a iPerf -s on the server side, and then run iPerf -c, then the IP address on the client side. And the default settings will run a TCP test for about 10 seconds, I think. And then there are a lot of other options to control the testing. One of my favorite options for iPerf3 is the -r command, which is, I think, only available in iPerf3. What that does is it allows you to sit at the console on the client side and then still have it send from the server back to the client. So it's actually a reverse test compared to what you would normally run by default, which is a client to server test. This will actually run the test from the server to the client. That's a very nice command feature of iPerf3. So here's a diagram of sort of how that's set up. So by default, if you were to run a client to server test, you would run iPerf -c with the IP address of the host or the server on your machine, which would be the laptop there. And then for the server, you would run iPerf -s, and then they would run a TCP test from left to right. If I was sitting at the client, I didn't want to walk over to the keyboard of the server. I would just run iPerf3 -R, and then it would send the data from the server back to the client. So it's a very nice feature of iPerf3 where you don't have to run around between the server and the client to run a test in two different directions. Some other flexible testing options. This is something that's probably more useful for us wireless engineers. One is that you're sitting at a single console, a single client machine, and you want to run a test to multiple servers. In that case, you can run iPerf-C and then use the AND command, then run another iPerf -C, and a single client will send a test stream to multiple servers on the other side. Okay? And the exact sort of converse or inverse of that is you can run a test from multiple clients to a single server by running that server as multiple instances of that server on that host on different port numbers. So I think in the afternoon demo that Jerry's doing, he may actually talk about this also and how he set that up. Here's some cases that I put together for how to use iPerf3. It's not only useful for throughput testing, but it can also be useful for some labbing. For example, if you want to generate background traffic for spectrum analysis, you can just use two different host machines, select a channel you want to run traffic over, run that test, and then you'll see background traffic as spectrum energy on your spectrum analyzer. Another one is that if you're doing a point-to-point bridge, maybe before acceptance of that bridge between you and your customer or you and your employer, you'd run a test between the 2 points and show that, okay, this 1 gigabit per second bridge is actually meeting that requirement. So instead of relying on just pointing the bridge and seeing signal information, actually running tests between the two different hosts is a good way to do acceptance testing. I'm going to go over some other testing scenarios, but the one that I like to talk about in detail a little bit later on is the client count versus throughput testing. I think that's the one that most of us really care more about. Again, this is a simple scenario. This is from my talk I did, I think, in 2014, where I had a similar talk, but a much longer talk, where I showed how when you run a single client test between a 2-stream MacBook Air to a wired receiver, you get about 550 megabits per second if that station is 5 feet away. And for this 2-stream laptop, the max would be, or the max PHY would be in the 800 range, but because of overhead and other issues, you're only getting 550 megabits per second or so. If you repeat that test again and add just 2 more stations, a non-wireless person would think that, okay, the 2 other stations combined with this laptop should still get around 550 megabits per second. But based on information that we know about wireless, where they're contending for the air, the data rate's actually much lower and in 300 megabits per second range. So when you're trying to explain to your customers or employers how things work with wireless, a good way to show them is to actually run a test using their clients, using their network, and then show them real numbers and show them why wireless works this way and what the numbers would be. The last scenario that is something that we can talk briefly about, we don't have time to get into it too much, but it's client throughput versus client count. iPerf3 is a really good way to show this, where what you can do is set up 30 clients using either a Raspberry Pi or an Odroid or some other type of client on one side, and then on the server side, run tests to that client and show the impact of different settings in your network. You may want to change minimum data rates, change channels, change the bandwidth of the network, of the channel width, and show the impact on data rates for each client. So a way that you can do that maybe is to run a serial test for all your clients. So all 1 through 60 or 1 through 30 clients run by themselves only, and then you get a certain data rate that you see per client. Then you start adding additional clients one at a time, and you would see what the total data rate would be for all those clients after they're added on. Then compare that to your total channel capacity and see if you're actually efficient in your settings. Then go back, tweak one setting where you may change the channel width from 20 to 40 and repeat that test again to see if the 60 clients have a better per client data rate or not. And then you can go into vendor-specific settings like airtime, fairness, some other things, and see how their settings compare to other vendor products using the same type of methodology. So again, not enough time to go into it in detail, but there's a link at the bottom of the presentation where I think this was from WLPC Europe, where Robert Crum talks about how they used iPerf3 for stadium validation testing, and they use a similar technique for demonstrating or confirming how their network was tuned or performing for their I think it was a cricket stadium. Now, kind of getting into this whole idea of interoperability project, what does it really mean? If you've ever started trying to compile iPerf3 or compile any iPerf or start using it, you may realize that it gets pretty tricky. There's not that much support out there, and the number of people that are available to bounce ideas off is not that great. So my thinking is that we would come up with a set of minimum standards that if someone is implementing iPerf3 on their product or their physical hardware, they could get certified so that when you were to buy it from them or to see that they support iPerf3, you would have a good knowledge that they meet certain requirements. So what does that sort of mean? So the idea is that we would come up with a minimum number of standards that iPerf3 would need to meet. For example, it should work in client mode, it should work in server mode, it should allow you to do UDP testing, TCP testing, and some other parameters. Define that as the minimum requirement, and then come up with a validation process where the vendor would claim that they meet this minimum requirement, and they would be considered sort of self-validated. And then if they wanted to get lab validated by a community of volunteers or maybe a third-party validation company, they would submit their documentation and their product or their software to that company. That company would validate that iPerf3 is working the way it's supposed to work. And then when you're actually testing using their product or their software, and you use it to make a buying decision for $1 million product, you know that it's meeting certain requirements and it's actually not like a bad implementation of iPerf3. If you actually promote iPerf3 and you can get it installed everywhere, you can do a lot of testing to verify that your network works a certain way. So in this example here, I've got 8 or 9 different points where you can have iPerf3 installed. I think today it's very common to find iPerf3 binaries already for clients and servers, but it's very hard to find vendors that have added iPerf3 to their hardware devices such as routers, switches, and controllers. And the hope is that if we start promoting iPerf3 as a way to test and to test throughput and to verify equipment performance, many vendors will start implementing iPerf3 also. So how you can help is that if you're a buyer of products, start recommending or requiring that the vendors support iPerf3. If you're a product manager and you're responsible for products that are either software or hardware, start adding iPerf3 support into your products. If you're a customer, request that your vendors give you test results using iPerf3. So if we start talking about iPerf3 a lot in the community, then vendors and other people involved in the industry will start supporting iPerf3, and that'll give you a way to test your product or your network using iPerf3 versus having to build it on your own from scratch or to add on a third-party device into your network to test with. Okay, thank you very much. And any questions, let me know.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @WirelessLANPros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter @KeithRParsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.